Hey, look, there's $100 on the ground over there. Just give me a second, I'm gonna grab it. What do you mean I don't have time? Hey, there's a 20 on the floor right by you. Why don't you pick it up? Well, get it as you're walking by. Yeah, sure you can. Why can't you? Well, make the time then. The following is a non-exhaustive list of things I don't give two poops about. 1. Hype and popularity. I've been in the board gaming hobby for quite a long time now, and I just don't buy the hype that follows certain game releases. 2 is the so-called cult of the new. I do follow the new board game releases, but as far as the games I actually have on my own game shelves here, a lot of them are many years old, and some are newer, of course. 3 are the game ratings and rankings on the Board Game Geek website. My own personal tastes tend not to align with your average board game hobbyist. For example, I tend not to enjoy the heavier Euro-style board games that a lot of the game hobbyists enjoy. So the ratings and rankings don't mean a lot to me in general. 4th are dungeon crawler games. I've never played a role-playing game, and so I don't have that shared experience that a lot of board game hobbyists have that seems to attract them to board games that give them a similar dungeon crawling D&D experience in a tabletop board game format. For me though, I just don't have the same background, and so it doesn't have the same appeal. All that being said, Gloomhaven is currently the most hyped, most popular board game on the website Board Game Geek, and it is rapidly rising in the game rankings. Last I checked, it was at number 7 of the tens of thousands of games in the database, and people are rating it extremely highly, obviously, and it is getting a great deal of attention. So I'm going to talk about my own experiences with Gloomhaven, and specifically I'm going to talk about what this game has given to me. Also, before I get into talking about the game, I should add the disclaimer that some of the components you're seeing here you won't see in your own box of Gloomhaven. I tend to enjoy enhancing the physical aspect of my games, so some of these things here, such as the coins, the treasure chest, and the doors, you won't find in the original game box. Obviously the painted minis. The health and experience trackers I've improved a little bit and are actually changed to dials in the second edition of the game. I've substituted smaller bases for the monster standees, and these are my own card holders. We also set up the game where all the monsters' life points are added to the cards and removed as they take hits, rather than the other way around where you add hits as the monsters are injured. And finally, I've added a bit of a 3D element to some of my dungeon furniture here as well. So what was it that did draw me to Gloomhaven? A big part of that was the fact that it is a legacy style game. Legacy games are a relatively new style of games that only appeared on the scene maybe 5 years ago when Rob Daviau designed Risk Legacy. The main idea behind legacy games is that they have somewhat of a campaign format, but as players progress through this campaign, things are actually added to the game or removed from the game in a permanent fashion. So you might actually remove cards from the game, tear them up and throw them out. Or you might open up a sealed packet in the game box and bring in new components and new rules to the game. You might add stickers to cards or board components to alter the way the game plays. And in so doing, you're permanently altering the game as it improves, grows, and progresses over time. A lot of gamers balk at the idea of permanently altering their games. Some are quite vocal about how much they hate that sort of thing. My own personal view is that it's the most innovative and interesting thing that's happened to the board game hobby in, well, probably as long as I've been playing games. I'm fascinated by the concept, although for my money there's really only been 2 good legacy games ever made so far, Gloomhaven being one of them. The other was Pandemic Legacy Season 1, and that provided me with some of the best board gaming experiences I've ever had. Gloomhaven and Pandemic Legacy I would list amongst my top 3 favorite games of all time. So that's my personal view on it, my own experience with it. And so when I saw on the Kickstarter campaign for the creation of Gloomhaven that it was a legacy style game, that immediately grabbed my attention and was a big part of why I pledged for the Kickstarter of the game. However, I was a little concerned with how the actual game would play out. My impression with a lot of these dungeon crawlers is that the hero and the monsters run up to each other, they both throw buckets of dice, and you keep doing that until somebody dies, and you carry on in that manner until you are finished the scenario. What I was really hoping for was a game where the math mattered, where movement mattered, where the tactical positioning was an important part of the gameplay, where you had to make smart decisions. But before I get into how the game actually plays out, let me talk about one interesting thing that came up before we started our first play. Knowing that we were probably going to be sticking with this game for quite a long time, I decided to paint up our starting figures. Now, a bit of personal disclosure, I have PTSD and the anxiety and severe depression that go along with that. As a result, I really struggle to find activities that make me feel happy and just relaxed and enjoying the moment. What really surprised me as I was painting up these figures, in the 25 or so hours it took me to paint them over a few days, I just felt so happy sitting there painting while listening to podcasts and ignoring all the other aspects of life that I struggle with. So right from the outset, this game gave me a creative outlet and a way for me to find something to do that really made me happy. Not only that, but once I was finished painting them, I felt a lot of pride in what I had accomplished. And it really made me realize that over the past several years, I haven't had a lot to feel really proud about. So it was quite an eye-opening experience to feel that content sort of happiness and the pride in accomplishing something afterwards. So that's really something that Gloomhaven gave me even before I got into the game itself. So the game, in a nutshell, it's extremely smart, extremely fun, engaging, challenging. I absolutely love it. It's hard though. First you've got to get through this 52-page rulebook, which I thought I had finished referencing after our 13th play, only to find yet another rule that we've been playing incorrectly. So the rules overhead is pretty high. And then once you actually start playing the game, it just challenges you right from the outset. I recommend first-time players start on easy level if they don't want a rude awakening in scenario 1. My group of 3 players are all very experienced gamers. Between the 3 of us, we've played hundreds of different board games. And we've been playing on easy right from the beginning. We've played 13 scenarios now. We've lost 2 of them. 2 of them were fairly easy victories. And the other 9, we've barely squeaked out wins, even on easy mode. So that's been what's working for us. So although we've been playing on easy, we're still very challenged by the game itself. Despite my fears, the gameplay is extremely tactical. Board movement and positioning is actually a very important part of the game. You don't just run up to monsters and hack at them until they're dead. There's a lot to think about with each and every turn in terms of how you position your characters, how you act with your characters, and how you interact with both your allies and your enemies in the game. One really amazing thing about the game is just how differently each of the individual characters plays. All characters have their own hand of cards that are very different from each other. As they further grow and gain experience and progress, they're going to differentiate themselves even more from the other characters in the game. Learning to play each character is a challenge. It took me a few games just to learn how to use my own character's card deck most effectively. Not only that, but the monsters themselves act very differently from each other. There are 30-something different monster classes in the game. Each has their own deck of cards which dictate how they act, and they are all surprisingly different from each other. All of them are scary too. There's not a single monster class where I go, oh good, it's only the living dead this time. Oh good, it's just the giant vipers this time. They keep surprising us with their abilities. We'll be playing some kind of demon and we'll be going, wait, it does what now? Certainly all of them feel scary in their own right. Each of them has creative and horrible things that they do to our characters. Every single thing about Gloomhaven is so damn smart and works together so perfectly. The way that these clever scenario mechanisms are woven together with the city events and with the overall narrative. And there's a difference here when compared to some other games that share similar elements. For instance, in Rob Davio's games, the game will just throw things at you that are complete curveballs just to show you who's boss. And you can't necessarily plan or prepare for these events. When you look at other heavily narrative-based games such as Tales of the Arabian Nights or Above and Below, you're given choices and you act on those choices, but so frequently the consequences of those choices almost don't matter. It's almost like those games try to trick you, where they'll give you a situation and lead you down a certain path only to nail you with something that you would have never seen coming. Conversely, in Gloomhaven, the choices you make sense within the overall experience. For instance, if you're doing a road event, you're traveling on the road, you encounter some sort of obstruction in your path. You're given the choice to either deal with what's in front of you or find a different route. If you choose to deal with the situation, then you do so, you gain or lose whatever the consequences are, then you tear up the card is out of the game. Or, if you make the choice to skirt around the problem, go somewhere else, that card goes back into the event deck and it might come up again. You might encounter that same situation and it will remain there until you choose to deal with it. Or another example is with the game's very simple elemental magic system, where you might be fighting against some frost demons, and if the fire element goes up in the scenario, then the frost demons might take some damage from that fire element. And every single detail of the game has been thought through and built up together in a way that makes a lot of sense. One phrase that my wife repeatedly says while we're playing in reference to the game designer Isaac Childress is, "This guy's brilliant." Something like that will come up in the game and again my wife will just say, "This guy is brilliant." And that's just a feeling that I share too. I just think it's just so clever on so many levels. And speaking of my wife, here's another thing that Gloomhaven has given me. One thing that comes along with the PTSD is a lot of social anxiety and a lot of self-imposed isolation. Over time, I've sort of let a lot of my friendships slide, and I spend a lot of time alone. Gloomhaven has given me an opportunity to spend regular periods of time with just a couple of the people who I most love in this world. And that's a big thing for me. It's not something that I do a lot anymore. It's also sort of made me realize that although I've never played an RPG before, I sort of have the heart of a DM, I think. Something in me just really enjoys setting these scenarios up for my little group of players. I actually tend to only set up the first room and leave everything else hidden. Once a new door is open, I add the next room to the board, and in that manner leave things a surprise for the other group members. And I just love preparing a really fun experience and a really fun story for myself and the people I play the game with. So what do myself and my fellow players ultimately think of Gloomhaven? Well, in a nutshell, we're all totally obsessed with this game. My one friend has given the game a rating of 9.5 out of 10. I asked my wife what she would give it out of 10, and she said 10 out of 10. And for me, it has actually replaced another massive and uncharacteristically for me complex game, War of the Ring, as my number one game of all time. That's right, Gloomhaven is now my favorite game, to the point where I have all these other games sitting on my shelves, but all I want to play is Gloomhaven. My own rating of the game is 9.5 out of 10. I subtracted that half a point for a few minor issues. One is the quality of the card stock is rather low. I generally really dislike sleeving my cards, but in this game I've had to sleeve some of the decks that get shuffled most frequently. In addition to that, a lot of the printing on things like the little player mats is very tiny, hard for my old eyes to be able to read. Now these are minor quibbles given that this giant game weighs literally 21 pounds and is chock full of a lot of amazing stuff, so there's no way you could expect a game that comes with 1,697 cards to have linen card finish and all this other fancy stuff. That would just be exorbitantly priced. Given that I received the game for an astonishingly low price through Kickstarter initially, I really can't complain about that too much. Another minor issue that again sort of comes back to the PTSD a bit is the fact that in the third scenario there was a situation that I had a bit of a hard time stomaching. It was easy to get around by skipping a few paragraphs in the story, but it wasn't something that I enjoyed coming across personally. Another thing is the huge amount of errata and clarifications that were required after the first printing of the game. Given the size and scope of the project, it's not really a huge surprise that a number of things would come up that would have to be dealt with. But it was just a little bit annoying to have to go through the scenario book and the rule book and correct a lot of things that needed to be corrected. And finally, just a personal preference, I find that the actual legacy aspect of the game is not as important a part of the game as I would have liked. The progression of revealing new things and upgrading things happens more slowly than I would prefer. You have to play a lot of hours of the game to really start to see some improvements in the way your character levels up or in the way new aspects are added to the game itself. Now these latter couple of points have been corrected in the second edition of the game. Obviously the new scenario book and rule book are going to be much better, and Isaac has made some small tweaks to speed up the progression of the game, which are something that I have adopted from my first edition. These are small points, and as I said, they're partially addressed in the new edition of the game. So, as far as I'm concerned, the game is almost perfect. There's one more thing that Gloomhaven has given to me, and I'm worried that this is going to sound pretty absurd. But one thing that comes along with PTSD and severe depression is a need to constantly push back the dark thoughts. One thing about having Gloomhaven is I now have something that I really look forward to doing every week with my loved ones. And as silly as this might be to say about something that's essentially a toy, just having that thing to look forward to all the time, it's enough to keep those dark thoughts from showing up so frequently. And that's not a small thing for me. So Isaac Childress, you have a masterpiece here. I congratulate you, and I truly thank you for what you've given to me through Gloomhaven. Hey, what's up? It's Josh here, just wanting to thank you for sticking around right to the end of the video. I really do appreciate that. If you want to give me a little support, a thumb up would be really appreciated. I'd love it if you would share the link for this video with one of the gamers in your life, and I hope I'll see you next time. Cheers. Other than that, this stupid thing keeps going to sleep on me. Wake up, laptop. I can't see myself. Okay. Let me talk about one aspect that I ran. What am I trying to say? Pause. They will further differentiate. differentiate. It's almost like those games try to... I can't see again. Abstract... What else was there? Oh. Let's zoom in a bit. It weaves together this clever gameplay with the overarching story narrative. Story narrative, that's redundant.